Hello friends, welcome to the channel. In this video, we are going to discuss about NAT Gateway. Here the term NAT means Network Address Translator, and we need NAT Gateway to access our private instance from public instance. But why we need to access our private instance? Because many of the software, or we can say that database instances, are launched in the private instance only for the security reasons, and sometimes you need to access them for updation and other changes. But for this we need to enable the access to these private instances, and for that we need the NAT gate. NAT gateways are always defined with the public subnet, and here in this video we will see how we can create a NAT gateway within our custom VPC and how to access the private instances from public instance. So let's start. But if you are new to the terms like private subnet, public subnet and route table settings to make a subnet public, then I prefer you to watch the video described in the description box before this video for better understanding of NAT gateway. So let's start. Here is my console. Here the first step is to create a custom VPC and two subnets within one availability zone. You may have multiple availability zone and multiple subnets within those availability zone, but just for the sake of understanding, I am keeping one availability zone within my custom VPC and two subnet. One is public and one is private. And here the CIDR block range will be 10.0.0.0 for my VPC. Here I have not defined the CIDR block range for my public and private subnet because it will be auto generated, as I am going to use the VPC and more option to create this complete setup. Here we will be creating one VPC with one availability zone and two subnets. One is public whereas another is private. So let's start. Firstly, search for the service VPC. Here I am going to use VPC and more option to create this complete setup just to save time. You can also go for manual setup. Next is I am giving the name as demo and CIDR block range is this. Next I am going to create only one availability zone. Here for NAT gateway I am selecting none because we will be setting up the NAT gateway by ourselves. And VPC endpoint none, we don't need any endpoint for this practical, and this will be the complete framework that is going to be created. Demo VPC with one availability zone and two subnets, one is public and other is private, and two route tables. The first route table is public, that is connected with public subnet, and the private route table is connected with the private subnet. So this is the complete setup, and this setup is equivalent to this setup. So let's just create it. Create VPC and it will automatically create the VPC required DNS, host names and subnets. So here the complete setup is ready, means VPC with required subnets and required route tables. All the setup for the public route tables is done. So let's view the VPC. Here is the detail of our VPC. Let's check the resource map. So the resource map is as per our requirement as we have defined. Only the public route table is connected with the internet gateway, not the private route table, because we are not having any direct access to our private subnet. And this is the default route table for our VPC. So let's move on to the next step. And the second step is to launch two EC2 instances, one in public subnet and another in the private subnet. And here SG means security group, and with security group we are going to allow only the SSH traffic just to connect with our instance. For both we are going to allow the SSH traffic only. You can also allow the HTTP traffic if you want to launch some static application, HTML application with your EC2 instances. And here next important thing is we will be assigning the public IP to our public instance launched in the public subnet, but there will be no public IP for our private instance because we don't want any direct access to our private instance. So let's start. We just need to create these two EC2 instances within our VPC, one with public IP and one without public IP. So let's start. Launch instance. So let's give it a name, public EC2. Rest I am keeping the default settings. Just I need to use a key pair because I want to connect to my instance. Next you need to edit the network setting to create or to launch your EC2 instance under your custom VPC. So here is our demo VPC, and for this subnet is public. Auto assign public IP should be enabled. So these three settings are required for public EC2. Next, it will automatically create a security group with allowing the SSH traffic only. So our first instance is ready. That is our public EC2. The status is running now. So let's launch another instance. And it will be private this time. Private EC2. Key pair for the connection. And let's edit the network setting, and this time for demo VPC. But we will be launching this instance under our private subnet. So you need to take care of these things because the private instance should belong to the private subnet. And this time we are not enabling the auto assign public IP, so it should be disabled, and it will automatically create a security group with SSH traffic and launch your instance. So here we have two instances. So let's check the details of public instance. Here the public instance is having a public IP address, and this is the private IP address that is under the CIDR block range of our VPC. Next, the private instance is running now. So let's check the details. The private instance is not having any public IP address. So you will not be able to connect to this instance. So let's try to connect them. Let's start with the public instance. Connect. We are going to connect through SSH client, and for this you need to copy this command and go to your command prompt. Next you need to move to the folder where your key is downloaded. Next paste the SSH command for the connection and press enter. So here we are able to connect with our public instance. But let's try to connect with our private instance. Select the private instance and click connect. Here let's check the EC2 instance connect option first. Here you are not having any public IP address, so you are not getting the connect option for your private instance. Let's go with the SSH client option. Here the command is to connect with your SSH client. So let's try to connect with our private instance through command prompt. Firstly, move to the folder where key is downloaded. So here we get the error that connection to host this connection timed out because we are not authorized to connect with our private instance through our command prompt. So now let's try to connect our private instance via our public instance. And this is also the third step in the process where we will try to connect our EC2 instance in the private subnet from EC2 instance defined in the public subnet. So let's start. This is our public instance. So let's try to connect with our private instance. Here is the command. Yes. And here we are getting the error for the permission denied because our public instance is not having key to connect with the private instance. This error indicates that our public instance is not having key to access our private instance. Now the next step is to copy the private instance key to the public instance. Only then public instance would be able to access our private instance. So let's continue with the step of copying the key of the private instance to the public instance. Before this, let's check the list of files in the public instance. These are the files of our public instance, but it is not having key to connect with our private instance. We need to copy the key of our private instance to our public instance. For that, let's create a file as EC2-key. Because this was the name of my key, you may change the name. And next, open the key. Here, this is my key. Open the key with Notepad. Copy the content and paste it here. So this is the key of my private instance. I have just created a new file in the public instance and pasted the key value. Next, we need to save this file and then we will try connecting with our private instance again. The file is saved. So let's check the list of files. Here L means listing of files with details, A means all files. So these are the files of my public instance this time, and here we are also having the key. So let's try to connect with the private instance again, and for that let's copy the SSH command again. This time we are getting a new error because the private key is unprotected and this file is having the write permission for the user, read permission for group and others as well. So this file should be having only read permission for the user. Only then you can be able to use the private key for the connection. It should be protected. For that you need to change the permission for your key with the public instance. So let's change the permission. For that we have the command like chmod 400 for read permission to user and none permissions to group and others for the file ec2-key.pem. And now the permission has been changed. Let's check the list of files again. And now the key is having only read permission for the user. So let's try to connect the private instance again. And this time we are able to connect with our private instance from our public instance. But this is not all done because we are only able to connect with our private instance. We are not able to access internet or we are not able to update anything with our private instance. So let's try to ping. Here we have just tried to ping google.com just to check the internet access with our private instance. And here we are getting 100% packet loss. That means our private instance is not still having the access to internet. Let's try to update something. Sudo yum update. Even the update will not be completed because we are not having internet access with our private instance. Here even this update cannot be completed because the instance is not having the internet access. I have to break the process or interrupt the process by pressing Ctrl+C, but the update was not completed. You can check the error encountered while trying to retrieve release update information. So this cannot be done because we had just connected with our private instance using the key, but still the private instance is not having internet access. So for that we need to move to the next step where we will be creating the NAT gateway. Here the fourth step is to test the internet connectivity for our private EC2 instance. For that we were getting the failure because the private instance is not accessible to the internet. So next step is to create the NAT gateway. Here we will be creating a NAT gateway with the public subnet of your VPC. Here the NAT gateways are also comes with the elastic IP. So let's complete this step. Go to VPC dashboard. Here we have the option to create NAT gateway. Create NAT gateway. Demo NAT. Now select the subnet as we have to define in our own public subnet. So this is demo subnet public 1 of our custom VPC. Next step is to assign the elastic IP for your NAT gateway. For that you just need to click on allocate elastic IP and then click on create NAT gateway. Here the gateway is created. Now move on to the next step in the slide. So this step is complete. After this step we have 6th step to connect the NAT gateway with the root table of the private subnet, because we need to create a path how the private subnet will communicate or access the internet. So for that we need to establish a connection from root table to the NAT gateway. For that you need to make one extra root entry for this root table, and that will be destination as 0.0.0 and the target or next hop in the path will be NAT gateway. So you need to add this path for the root table of the private subnet. So let's start. Select the root table of the private subnet. This is my private subnet root table, and edit roots. Here you need to add one more root, destination as 0.0.0 and the target as NAT gateway. Select your custom NAT gateway and just save the rule. So now the root table is updated and this complete setup is ready. Now our private instance is also having access to the internet. So let's check. Let's try to ping google.com, and this time we are getting response. Here you can see 0% packet loss. So this time our private instance is having access to the internet. Now let's try to perform the update. For that we have sudo yum update -y. And you can see update is also complete. But we were getting failure for the earlier attempt because at that time we were not having NAT gateway associated with our private subnet. So that's it for this video. You can try NAT gateways by creating multiple subnets in multiple availability zone. You can have multiple NAT gateways in multiple public subnets, or you can have all the private subnet connecting to one NAT gateway. See you in the next video. Till then, bye and take care.